Well, thank you for letting me join this session today. As James noted, I'm part of Progress. I'm the engineering manager for the Corticon product. We are a user of the data direct drivers, and what I'm going to be showing are the sorts of things that you could do with the data direct drivers as well. And in particular, what we focus on is the autonomous Rex connector and the problems that it solved for Corticon. So I'll just start in here. All right, so for those who don't know what Corticon is a business rules management system. Business rules management system is software that's designed to help you make your business decisions. When you're in a highly regulated, policy-driven environment such as healthcare, insurance, other financial markets, it's important that you are able to execute your business policies consistently and accurately. And equally important is you have to be able to make sure you're able to express the rules for those business policies and test them to validate that they are correct. So this is what Corticon does. It's sort of things, what discounts should be applied if you're in a e-commerce type application. Is this transaction fraudulent? Would be the sort of thing you're looking for in a financial application. What resource should we allocate? That could be in some sort of industrial type environment, or it could be in a sales lead routing type application. So Corticon has a broad reach for the sorts of applications that you can build with Corticon. Corticon is when it's deployed, it's always part of a complex ecosystem of components. We integrate with lots of different data sources. We have multiple interfaces into Corticon. So, the typical deployment would be, Corticon's behind a workflow system that might be processing, say, a mortgage application, and the application will be calling off maybe to Corticon to determine if somebody is qualified, what programs should be available to that mortgage applicant, and then Corticon would be accessing various data sources that are necessary to get information about that. It could be an internal database that you have. It could be external data sources that you need to access as well. But Corticon brings all of that information together to make policy decisions for your business or enterprise. Corticon is used in by lots of customers in lots of various ways today. I'm not going to go into any of these in any detail. This is just to show that Corticon, it's a widely used product, and it's used in lots of complex, real-time, enterprise critical environments. We're very heavy into state government. There's lots of state agencies that use Corticon. Anything from in healthcare, that's the big, Health and Human Services, that's the big market for us with the state governments. Again, this is just showing you the broad reach of Corticon. So Corticon's approach to data access is that within Corticon, you start by defining a vocabulary. That's the model for your the data model for the problem that you're solving, and for the questions, the policies that you need to implement. In this, you define the entities, the attributes, the associations between data that represents the domain that you're working in. It could be an applicant with all of their name, their address, financial information, all the data that you would need to be able to, all the attributes that you would need to be able to process an applicant. It could be a patient with their medical history, the records that you would, definition of the records that you would need to make decisions about, whether a certain treatment is covered, how it's covered, what would be the next best course of action for a patient. So you start by doing defining the vocabulary, and then once you have your vocabulary, you can map that to your data sources, and this is where we take advantage of the data direct drivers. One of the advantages that we have in developing a business rule system is that being part of Progress, we're able to take advantage of the other components that Progress produces. One of the big ones that we do take advantage of is the data direct connect drivers. So we have bundled the connect drivers for a long time. Those give us access to lots of sort of your traditional SQL type databases. The problem that we've had is that a lot of the data that you want to get to today is not directly accessible through a standard sort of JDBC database type interface. The data is behind REST services, and this is a problem that we've wanted to solve for Corticon for a number of years. We have a data access story in Corticon. We tell our customers, hey, if you're using Corticon to create your rules, you have the ability from that system to go access your data sources, bring the data in to do data enrichment, get additional information so that you can complete your rule processing. That's a great story. It's been very successful for us, but we've been coming up short, more recently, because we haven't had that REST capabilities. Now, in the past, customers have, Corticon users have just custom coded this. We have all sorts of extension mechanisms so that they could create their own extensions for accessing REST services. But that's obviously not what we want to have, out of the box. We want to give customers a solution out of the box, and this is where the autonomous REST connector comes in. So. We need the REST support, just examples of the sorts of data that you would want to get to. It could be internal REST services that you have where you've got your patient detail, order history. It could be external REST services, like you want to access a credit bureau to get a credit report for somebody that's applying for some program. You might be accessing a supplies REST service. So if you're making decisions on how you're going to package or prioritize your production, you can access suppliers. The graph in here is just to show the growth in the web APIs. Again, this just is supporting the message here that a lot of the data that you want to access today from not just your rule system, but really any system, is behind REST services and not directly accessible through what we would consider a traditional SQL type database interface. So we've wanted to add this capability to Corticon, but how do we do this in a way that we can leverage all the existing mechanisms that we have in Corticon? And this was the great advantage to us for using the autonomous REST connector, is that it allowed us to really use the code base that we have in place. With Arc, the autonomous REST connector, it gives the application effectively a JDBC interface or a database interface to a REST service. Now, for Corticon, this is really important because we have lots of code that's written to use the database interface, to use the schema information, to use the database metadata, and by leveraging, by using all of that, where all that was still available to us, again, from other than making the initial connection to the REST service and some configuration. From a programming standpoint, you're effectively just talking to a database, and it will function like a database. You can get your vocabulary metadata, you can get your schema, and this is all stuff that we take advantage of. One of the big benefits of this from a Corticon user's perspective is that the usage of Corticon and how you map to your data sources, it's consistent. Whether you're mapping to say an Oracle or a SQL Server database, or you're mapping to set of REST services that you have. Your experience as somebody that's defining the vocabulary, mapping it to data sources is very, it's very consistent. We started working on the REST support for Corticon back, it was in the fall last year. This was before Arc had been, the autonomous REST connector had been released, but even with an early beta version, we were able to just a matter of days, prove that this was going to work for Corticon. We took it, we for our first demonstrations, we just had some hard-coded REST services that we're accessing, and with very little effort, we were able to get the data into Corticon, we'll be able to do our mapping, and it really kind of worked. It was a lot more work to sort of polish it up, and there was still work and development was going on the REST connector, and ways to make it more usable from a Corticon user's perspective. But the core mechanisms we were able to prove really quickly, and that gave us, we were very excited about that because it showed that we had a path to address a need that we had in the product for quite a while, which was expanding our data access story to include the REST support, and this gave us the means to do that. So just some quick highlights of what we're the features that we're taking advantage of with the autonomous REST connector. We're supporting both the schema discovery mode. So with Arc, you can connect to, you give it a URL, and you can just let it discover the schema for you, and then you can just proceed from there. That works really well in Corticon because someone doesn't have to have details of how it's going to get mapped necessarily to a data source. I mean, into a database schema. You don't have to worry about the the SQL aspects of it. But if you also want to customize how it's going to map into a schema, we support the export and import capability. So again, these are features that are available to you with the Autonomous REST connector. You can supply your own schema file, which says how to map that REST service into a database schema. So we're supporting both of those modes. In Corticon 6.0, which will be coming out in the end of this quarter, we're going to support just the write access. When Autonomous REST, we just read-only access. When write access support is available in the Autonomous REST connector in the future, well, we'll pick up that support, and hopefully we'll get that for equally low cost from a development standpoint as we got the read support. So what I want to do is I'm going to give a quick demo of this. So I know this is not a Corticon audience. I'm not going to try to do too much of a sales pitch here on Corticon, and I'm going to focus on the Autonomous REST connector aspects. But just quickly within Corticon, when you define your vocabulary, this is where you're defining the model for for the domain that you're working in. In this case, it's a very simple sample where we have a patient. They have different treatments, medical procedures that they've gone in for, and then each of those treatments have one or more reimbursement rates. Now, there could be rates that are for different time periods or different characteristics about the different reimbursement rates. You can see here there's attributes that are defined for each of these. There's associations, these little sort of like railroad track type icons. So that's an association that's saying this treatment has one or more rates. Now, for customers that have used Corticon for a long time, they're familiar with the database access mechanisms, and you can see here I have multiple data sources. It's very easy to add a data source to Corticon. This is, you see I'm accessing a SQL Server database. I have my connection information for accessing that database. This is patient data. If you look here over the left, the patient data is selected here, and when I change this, it will show me, it'll put little markers on all the fields that are mapped to that database. So in this case, I can see patient ID, date of birth, the gender, all these sets of fields that have this DISPAC icon are mapped to to that data source. Similar for the treatment data, same type of thing. Again, it's a very, you configure the database and then you can then map your attributes to that data source. Now, when we added the REST support, we wanted to take advantage of all of the mechanisms that you see here. All of the stuff here that I can come in here and select a field and say how I want to map that to a database. We wanted to leverage all of that. Now, when we added the REST support, it again just shows up as a data source. The connection parameters are obviously different. You can specify the URL. There's different modes of authentication that we can provide. You can pass query parameters. There's different ways you can pass your query parameters. The query parameters can come from live data, the data that's being processed in the payload that was passed to Corticon. But other than putting in how you configure the data source, the other aspects of this, of how the vocabulary mapping works, we just got that for, I wouldn't say for free. It was obviously, we had some back and forth with the ARC team, because they were in their early stages of development. But it's largely, this just kind of worked for us. We discovered the database schema, all of the mechanisms there for mapping to it, they just worked. It's just a database from our perspective. You can see here for when I have the rate data source selected, that I've got the rate entity, and several of its fields are mapped to that data source, as well as the treatment and medical code are mapped to that data source. Now, I'll give you a running example of this in just a moment. This is the workflow here. So this is the flow that's happening. This is get patient data. This is accessing a database to retrieve information. Get CMS details, accessing another database. We then have some rule processing that's occurring to determine whether this claim is going to be approved or not. And then we go to another step, and this is the new capability that's coming in 6.0, and this is what Arc's providing us, is we can now go to a REST service and get information from there. So in this case, I'm going to a REST service that's going to return reimbursement rates, produces some messages, what was approved, not approved, and the reasons why, and then saves all this back off into the database. Just quickly, I'll show you the REST service that we're accessing here. This is the data that's being returned. This is a simple REST service. This is for demonstration purposes. We have tests and we've accessed much more complex REST data. But you'll see here that it's returning a list of procedures where for each procedure code, here's procedure 1, procedure 2, you'll see the codes, and then there's one or more rates that are associated with that procedure code. Now, just to show this as a sort of real, actually running capability here, one of the features of Corticon is when you're defining your rules, there's a built-in tester. So in this case, I'm passing in just patient ID number 1, and I'm going to actually run this, and this will hit each of those databases as well as that REST service to retrieve that data. So you can see here, we've brought in the data from these diverse data sources to help enrich the payload so that we can make our business decisions about that need to be made based on this patient and the treatments that they received and the rates that are applicable. So again, this is live. This is hitting real databases, real REST services. And the key takeaways of this from, again, I'm not, this isn't a Corticon pitch. We're here to share the success that we've had using the autonomous REST connector. It's allowed us to very quickly add support for REST services to what was a very sort of database, JDBC type of application. And the capabilities that they provide by giving us that database interface into that REST service allowed us to leverage a big code base that we had in place, allowed us to give our users a consistent experience. And we're really looking forward to the release of 6.0 so that we can provide this to customers who can start benefiting from these new capabilities.